up to Nashville to play Vanderbilt, and that is where we check in with our good friend Julian Mininsohn. First of all, Julian, this is a Vanderbilt team that's in a really interesting and precarious position right now as it relates to the college football playoff. Obviously played very, very well in the fourth quarter last week. Barely lost to Texas there in Austin. Now they return home for a big game against the Tigers. As you reflect on what you have seen from last Saturday to this point, where is this football program?
Well, it's interesting, right? I felt better about this Vanderbilt team after that 17-point loss to Alabama than I did after the 3-point loss to Texas. And that's because that 3-point loss and that score was not indicative of how poor the Commodores played.
Right.
I mean, from the first play from scrimmage, when Arch Manning and company gashed them for 80 yards, they pretty much had to play catch up the rest of the way. And the problem with this Vanderbilt team, and one of their weaknesses, I guess, if you could, poke holes in this roster and their scheme, is the fact that they have to win by running the football. And you can't really run the football well enough when you are constantly trailing. And so, that fourth quarter, yes, it was impressive to score 21 points, but that's also Texas in soft coverage and maybe keeping their foot off the gas a little bit. So, it's going to come down to two things. Can Vanderbilt run the ball this weekend against Auburn? Because Auburn, if there is one thing that the Tigers do well, it is stop the run.
Right.
Yeah.
And can they win the time of possession? And that is the reoccurring stat across all of Vanderbilt's wins, is that they win that TOP and they shorten the game that way. And sometimes for a lot of teams, not, this is excluding Auburn because their offense hasn't been very good, but a lot of times the best defense is to keep an offense off the field, which is what you would have hoped to do to Texas, but they couldn't because they were playing catch up the entire time. So we'll see. This is going to be kind of an ugly game, I think, because the teams that stop the run really well have done really well against Vanderbilt. You saw Texas do it last week. You saw Mizzou almost beat them here in Nashville a couple weeks ago, and that one was ugly. So I wouldn't be surprised if this one is a grinder, guys.
Absolutely. There you see some of the numbers that you were referring to, the fact that Auburn has been very stingy there against the run. With that being said, do you expect Pavia to open it up a little bit more, the offense to be opened up a little bit more for him to throw it, maybe 30, 40 times in this football game and attack the Tigers downfield? Kind of the inverse of what we typically see. Teams usually try to run the ball to set up the pass. Do you think it might be the opposite here, given how solid Auburn is against the run?
Yeah, if there was a game where Diego Pavia is just going to let it loose on that front, this is probably it right now. I want to say that, they're not going to get too far away from what they like to do, and Clark Lee knows this team wins up front in the trenches, and they run the ball really well. And so I think they maybe establish it just to keep Auburn a little bit honest, but I do expect a big-time Pavia game. I think they has the weapons to do it. Obviously, Eli Stowers was one of the bright spots. He caught a touchdown against Texas and has been, their top target all year long, as you see him right there on the screen.
Yep.
Diego Pavia also, I think came back down to earth a little bit after a lot of the talk of, heck yeah, I want to win the Heisman, and I feel like I should be in that conversation, and a lot of the quotes that he was saying over the last few weeks. I think this is the perfect get-right game for not just Vanderbilt's offense, but Vanderbilt's defense as well, because you talk about the college football playoff, guys. Yes, Vanderbilt doesn't necessarily control their own destiny right now. They're going to need some help, but out of the other SEC teams that have 2 losses, Vanderbilt's probably have the most favorable schedule and path the rest of the way.
Absolutely. And Clark Lee talked about that a little bit, being able to be the team that's kind of under the radar, so to speak, and people writing them off. Let's hear from Coach.
I don't really consume anything outside these walls. This is about our team needing to play better, and that team that we showed up with for the first 3 quarters, I don't know how you don't write it off. I mean, we didn't play well, and we didn't play like a team that had something at stake, and I credit Texas with that, but I also challenged our guys to show up and again, play Vanderbilt football. So we don't worry about whatever the perception is externally or whatever those things are. It's just about, how here late in the season do we line up and play a way that we're proud of, knowing that the game honors toughness. And when you play the game the right way, the game rewards you. That's what we're going to focus on this week.
Julian, I know you talked a little bit about Diego Pavia wanting to win the Heisman and all the talk about that. And then back in the offseason, there was talk about Pavia, saying we're going to win a national championship. We're going to make the college football playoff. You mentioned that they don't control their own destiny, but do you see a scenario where Vanderbilt still can get in, and how feasible is it?
Yeah, absolutely. And like I just mentioned, out of the rest of the SEC teams like Texas, Oklahoma, Mizzou, those ones, and of course Vanderbilt, out of all of those teams that with 2 losses and they're kind of on the outside looking in right now, Vanderbilt's path is the most favorable. Of course, you got Auburn, which is a game that you should win. You have Kentucky after a bye week, which is a game that you should win. And then you got the tough one in Knoxville on the road against Tennessee, which, yes, that'll be a tough game, but it's a rivalry game and anything can happen. These other teams, you look at Texas, for example, this past weekend. Yes, they have the head-to-head against Vanderbilt right now, but they still got to play Georgia and they still got to play A&M.
Right.
Oklahoma's got a tough sledding of it, and Vanderbilt already beat Missouri. So, yes, Vanderbilt's going to have to win out, and they are going to need some help. They are going to need some of these other conferences, like the Big 12, for example, only get 1 team in. They should be rooting for BYU to beat Texas Tech, so Texas Tech has 2 losses after this weekend. Right. So there is a feasible path, but it means nothing unless they win these games. And it starts with Auburn this week.
So if they do win these games, and we're all for hypotheticals here, I see a scenario where Texas and Oklahoma both lose because they still have to play Georgia, Texas A&M, and Alabama for Oklahoma. And I see a scenario where it could come down to 10-2 Vanderbilt and Michigan for that last college football playoff spot. Does a Michigan win over number 1 Ohio State get them in the playoff over Vanderbilt's resume as of right now?
Ooh, that's tough.
Yeah.
That is tough. And if you're the CFP committee and you're looking at to sell tickets and market the tournament, yeah, Michigan's probably the better. I mean, if we're just being honest,
yeah.
Right. But going and the problem with Vanderbilt is, yeah, they had the number 2 toughest schedule in the country coming into the season, but that schedule doesn't look as tough anymore, considering LSU is not as good as we thought, South Carolina is not as good as we thought, even Texas, who is the preseason number 1, isn't as good as we thought. What's Vanderbilt's best win if they were to win out? Probably on the road at Tennessee, if that does happen, and maybe at home against Missouri. So, I would love to see the Commodores in there. I think it's a great story, and it's not just because I cover the team, but I think it's an awesome story, and to have a personality like Diego Pavia in there is awesome. But Michigan, if that does happen, like we're talking about scenarios, they are a big brand, and brand recognition in college football, as you guys know, is everything.
Yep, exactly. It's everything. And speaking of brand, Diego probably has his own brand. One final football thing before we spring over to basketball. Diego Pavia is in a really unique situation because he beat Auburn as the quarterback of the New Mexico State. He beat Auburn as a quarterback of the Vanderbilt Commodores last year. He has a chance to beat Auburn 3 times in his career. Do you expect any time over the course of the 60 minutes on Saturday he's going to remind Auburn of that and say, hey, look, guys, I've had your number for your entire career here?
Knowing Diego, there might be some sort of celebration in the end zone where he I don't know if he's going to hush the Auburn fans that are there or what have you. I mean, everything's on the table when it comes to Diego Pavia. If I'm Auburn, I'm thinking like, man, what do I have to do to get away from this guy?
I know.
You know what I mean? Like there's just guys that just have your number. And I think also you think about it, Auburn's catching Diego Pavia and this Vanderbilt team at probably the worst time.
No
any other time of Auburn football, they're beating up on a Vanderbilt team, but it's the way this team is built. Clark Lee's Vanderbilt with Diego Pavia, who has your number. It's kind of a recipe for a disaster. Now, I will say there is a chance of an interim coach bump that Auburn could get.
Yes. Yeah.
But after seeing that game against Kentucky last week, which was a fireable offense, by the way,
Yeah.
I just don't see how Vanderbilt loses this one. I mean, you score 17 to 20 points, you're probably safe, and that's not as much as Vanderbilt is used to scoring this season.
And that's right on average for what the Auburn defense has been giving up this year.
Right. And like Julian said, I think you can trust the fact that Auburn's offense won't be able to score that much to keep it on board.